That's why we do it. And oh, guess what? Sometimes giving is, a sacrifice. It's a sacrifice sometimes. It is a sacrifice. We're given the privilege to sacrifice, to sacrificially give to the Lord. And Paul says we do this cheerfully. Sometimes it is a sacrifice. You say, Jim, well, I've been giving, but, I don't see the blessing. The blessing is being stored up for you. And in some measure, you'll receive blessing in this life, but by and large, most of it you'll receive in the next. We're not playing a slot machine here. If you've been taught this, it's blasphemous. Run from that. I like how Galatians 6:9 says it. And let us not lose heart in doing good, for in due time we shall reap if we do not grow weary. So we happily leave the promised reward of God with God. This is one of the first things you learn as a giver, a sacrificial giver. Whether God blesses me materially or not, that's not the point. He may well. There are promises in the Bible. But the bulk of your blessing most likely will be, I know it will be, in eternity. But we leave the promised reward to Him. It's in His hands. How much He gives me now, how much He gives me later, it's all in His hands. I don't care about that, really. That's not the core issue. I know it is in much of the church, with much of the false teaching in the modern church. But that is not the core issue. Christian giving involves sacrifice. Randy Alcorn says this: it's much easier to give substantially and to live on 90% of your income or 50% of your income or 10% of your income inside the will of God than it is to live on 100% outside His will. Don't you love that? I think that's a great statement. So I want to spend the last few minutes, I want to turn over to Luke chapter 12 and just make a few brief points from Luke chapter 12. Hope you'll turn over there with me. Just a few brief points. Verse 15, someone has asked Jesus to divide the family inheritance, and Jesus says, hey man, that's not my job. Verse 15, He says, beware. So you go check the Greek. Beware, Jesus says. It's the strongest warning off the lips of Jesus in the New Testament. Beware. It's not about demons. It's not about adultery. It's not about, it's about money. You know why it's about money? Because 15% of everything Jesus said had to do with money. You know why? Because money gets in a human heart. Money gets in the human heart. And people begin to treasure the money, or they begin to depend on the money. Listen, you're supposed to treasure God and depend on God. Money is a huge problem for the human heart. This is why God speaks to it so frequently. But Jesus says, watch out. He says, get back. This is what He's saying here. And it's about our money. It's not about false doctrine or murder. It's about money. Jesus tells the parable of a certain rich man. I thought I would stop and ask you, who do you think of when you think of a rich man? Who do you think of? Bill Gates is a rich man. The Google boys are rich. Saudi oil sheiks, they're rich. But most of you don't realize when you look in the mirror, you're looking at a rich man. If we go by global standards, if you make more than 10,000 US dollars or 6,500 euros, you make more than 85% of the world. If you make more than 37,000 US dollars or 24,000 euros, you make more than 95% of the world. I know a lot of us in Western Europe and other places, we don't think we're rich. We are. Most of us are. Most of us are. I understand about cost of living. I get that. I understand that. But there are billions who could not begin to dream of making in a year what some of us make in a month. Billions of people. Billions. I just wanted to give you some global context there. Jesus tells the parable, verse 16, Luke chapter 12. The land of a certain rich man was very productive, and he began reasoning to himself, saying, "What shall I do, since I have no place to store my crops?" And he said, "This is what I will do. I will tear down my barns, and I will build larger ones. And there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have many goods laid up for many years to come. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry." This guy made at least 2 fatal errors, at least 2. There may be more. I'm just going to highlight 2. One is, do you notice the orgy of personal pronouns? I think I counted 12. Personal pronouns. He thinks this stuff is his. He thinks this grain is his. Whose is it? Someone tell me. It's God's grain. It's not his. He does not own it. And everything you have, you do not own it. It's God's. It's on loan to you. It is God's, and you will give an account to God. You are a steward of everything you have. Everything God pours into your life materially, you are a steward of it. Beloved, I want to challenge you. Understand your stewardship and be a good steward. Be eager to give an accounting to the Lord on the last day. Be eager to give such an accounting. This guy thought it was all his. 4 times in the Bible, God says, the earth is mine and everything in it. It is mine, God says. Beloved, there's just something wrong if we claim to be a Christian and we're not open-handed back to God. I mean, what has God withheld from us? Someone tell me what God has withheld from us. Not one thing. Not even His Son. This guy's clueless. He thinks it's his. It's not his. It's God. It's all God's. God's abundant in prosperity that He gives to His people. It's never God's provision for me to indulge myself. It's God's provision for me to meet the needs of the church and to meet the needs of those in the community. I like Randy Alcorn's thought here. He says, prosperity is a blessing, of course, but it is also a spiritual test. Are you passing the spiritual test? As God pours resources into your life, are you pouring it back out? I think he's right. And can you imagine the accounting this guy has to give to God? Can you imagine? Well, I was eating and I was drinking and I was being merry, and then I thought I'd build some barns and put all my stuff in there. How do you want to say that to God? Can you imagine it? Can you imagine him standing there and giving this kind of an account to God? Millions will. What did you do with what I gave you? Well, I pretty much spent it all on myself. This will be the account that millions, billions in the world will give.